Welcome back to the Gary Sutton Show on WSBA. Our next guest is Bob Dick, who is a policy analyst with Commonwealth Foundation. And want to talk a little bit this morning about a lady named Mary Trometter and something called Mary's Law that he refers to. And we're going to get into some of that this morning with Bob, and he joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show. After 2 times being canceled before, Bob, it's great to finally get you in here today. We do exist. Good morning to you.
Gary, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great to have you in this morning, and a Merry Christmas to you belatedly, and a Happy New Year to you in advance. Bob, Mary Trometter, a lot of people don't know much about Mary Trometter, but you know a lot about Mary Trometter, and what her experience tells us a little bit about paycheck protection and some of the things I know you've been working on at the Commonwealth Foundation for a while. Take us inside Mary Trometter and Mary's Law a bit.
Sure. Mary Trometter is a college professor in the Williamsport area. She's also a member of the Pennsylvania State Education Association, or the PSEA, which is the largest teachers union in Pennsylvania. And around the time of the election, she received a letter from the PSEA, which read in part to join Mary in voting for Tom Wolf on November 4th. Now, There are a number of problems with this. First, Mary never authorized the PSEA to use her name in this manner. Second, Mary had no intention of voting for Tom Wolf on November 4th. This letter was not sent to Mary, but was actually sent to her husband, who is not a member of the PSEA. And her dues were actually used to produce this letter, as well as the dues of teachers across the Commonwealth. So, and if that's not bad enough, you also have taxpayers who are responsible for collecting the political money used to fund this type of letter. And so this really crystallizes why we need Mary's Law to, one, prevent taxpayers from subsidizing politics they disagree with, but also to help Mary and other public employees hold their unions more accountable in terms of their political spending.
There's a group out there called the Fairness Center, which is a nonprofit public interest law firm that helps public employees who are wronged by their unions. And she basically filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania Labor Relations Board alleging that the NEA and Pennsylvania State Educational Association violated state law by using those funds, as you mentioned, to support a political candidate. And, of course, she got something back, I guess, with the PSEA spokesperson, David Broderick, that said, well, the union received a small number of complaints about the letter and stressed the organization is sensitive to those comments. We've apologized for the way the letter was worded, and we've told those members who we won't use this approach again, and we regret that any of our members were offended by this. What do you take away from this? I mean, what's going on here?
Well, unfortunately, they made a mistake, which is a good thing, but this just shows the need for paycheck protection, because if they can produce letters like this and upset many of their members, they've mentioned 30, but that's just the people who actually complained. This letter was sent to more than 20,000. And if they're going to upset members like this, then this is just another reason why teachers, as well as public employees across the state, need to be able to hold their unions accountable in terms of their political spending.
The NEA paid for the letter out of its NEA advocacy funds, which OpenSecrets.org describes as a left-leaning super PAC that spends heavily against Republicans. The NEA president, Lily Eskelsen Garcia, and the PSEA president, Michael Crossy, signed the letter, which criticized education funding levels under Republican Governor Tom Corbett, who defeated Wolf for the election. Or who Wolf defeated for the election, excuse me. And he said, for everyone in public education who cares about students, is what it said in the letter, who knows the value of a collective voice and a safe retirement, Tom Wolf is the only choice for governor. The letter stated, it's just as important that every family member of an educator support Tom Wolf, too. Thus, Mary Trometter's husband gets this letter, not Mary Trometter. Her husband, as far as we know, is not in the union at all, is he?
He's not. And, this is really insulting, too, to teachers across the state who had their own opinions on what's best for Pennsylvania, and for the union leaders to speak as one voice and claim that they're representing all of their members. It's just wrong. There are people who have genuine disagreements with these union executives, and obviously Mary Trometter is one, but there are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of teachers across the state who don't, toe the line of more education spending, fighting against merit pay and seniority and things like that. So just for the union to speak as if they know what their members feel it's wrong.
Well, I used to be the head of a local teachers union, a local teachers association. many years ago, back in the 70s. I taught for 25 years, and since that time, I see unions in a little bit different way. But during that time, I was trying to get people in because I thought we were a professional organization and we were trying to look out for teachers and act as advocates. And one of the things that I most disliked even then, being a president of a local association, was the fact that our dues were tied to not so much PSEA, because we used PSEA services a number of times, but more to the NEA, where I would get publications sent to me as a member, and it would say we're endorsing this person, this person, this person. I said, well, that's not the person I'm voting for, and yet my money was going as though 100% of all teachers would be voting for their particular choice. And we know from a lot of information in this country that roughly it's about 60-40 Democrat-Republican split. So if it's 60-40 split and they're spending 100% of the money on what end up being left or Democratic issues, a lot of us find that to be offensive. I found it to be offensive at the time then, and I find it to be even more offensive now.
Right. And the great thing about paycheck protection or Mary's Law is if unions are required to actually go to teachers and say, okay, we want the political portion of your union dues, because that can be used for a variety of political activities, contrary to what many have stated, they can say, okay, well, why are you spending so much on this particular candidate when I don't agree with that candidate? So
right.
There's this face-to-face interaction here, and that actually helps teachers and other public employees hold their unions more accountable.
And, listen, if it was just taking union dues, I probably never thought about it as much when I was teaching. I got to be honest with you, Bob. We're talking with Bob Dick this morning, a policy analyst with the Commonwealth Foundation. I never thought about it much. Okay, not as much as I think about it now, because I'm looking at it more and analyze it a lot more, and I've gotten a lot older. But I guess the idea that you're taking those union dues, nobody else gets to do that through your employer, and then you're taking that money and you're using that politically out there, and there's no question about breaking it down and saying, okay, well, here's what your dues are going for as far as you, and here's the other part of your dues is going out there as far as politics. I mean, there's something really off base about that, and the fact that it's being used in an untrue way should bother a lot more people than it seems to be bothering right now, and instead we see both sides kind of line up and saying, I'm going to win and you're going to lose, or vice versa, instead of looking at the rightness and wrongness of this.
You're right. And government unions in Pennsylvania, they're a privileged class. They have the ability, one, to use taxpayer resources to collect their political money, not just union dues, but also PAC money, political action committee money, which can be given directly to candidates. They have the ability to compel membership. So even if they're not providing a good service, they can still compel public employees to support them.
Yeah.
And so, it's just they're a privileged class, and that's why paycheck protection, while it wouldn't solve all these problems, it would at least give public employees, another safeguard for them in terms of their union spending their money.
Now let's look ahead to the new year. You've got a governor who may have benefited from some of this. Okay, a governor coming in, governor-elect right now, Wolf, who may have benefited from some of this. Obviously, he is a union guy. The unions back him. When he brought President Obama here into the state, he never brought him here, but he brought him into Philadelphia and places where the unions are big. We've seen the Republicans and Democratic leadership alike, who the Republicans just voted at least a couple of those guys out from down the Philadelphia area, who are both controlled by the unions for the most part, or at least influenced greatly. So you look at that and you say, okay, and yet at the same time, we had Republicans in the state assembly upped by considerable numbers in both the Senate and the House. We've seen kind of a revolt in the state assembly right now and getting some of those leaders out of there from the Philadelphia area. I think that was wonderful. So you look at that standoff this year. What kind of push do you think there's going to be for paycheck protection in the long run to kind of undo this wrong?
Well, I can tell you from the Commonwealth Foundation's perspective, whether it would have been Governor Corbett winning re-election or now Governor-elect Tom Wolf, we're going to continue to push for this issue because it's important. It's important to taxpayers who should not be forced to subsidize political beliefs that they disagree with, and it's important to public employees who should be able to hold their unions more accountable and have a mechanism by which to do that. So regardless of the governor, regardless of the General Assembly, we're going to continue to push for this issue because it's the right thing to do.
Do you sense, and I know Scott Wagner from our 28th senatorial district right here in our area has been pushing this fairly hard. It got even a little bit of a vote there on the floor this last term. do you see the appetite for this for the Republicans stepping into this new year?
It's tough to say. I don't have my pulse on my finger on the pulse of the legislature, but
right.
There's definitely received 20 votes in the Senate when Scott Wagner brought it up for a vote. So there's definitely some support in the Senate. There's a lot of support in the House, and we're confident that eventually this will get passed, and the collection of political money will no longer be the responsibility of taxpayers.
How strong are the unions right now in putting the pressure on their representatives here in the state, be it the Senate or the House, in keeping the status quo right now, keeping it the way it is?
They're probably the biggest roadblock to many of the issues that your listeners care about and the Pennsylvanians care about. They have obviously the political privilege of collecting, having their political money collected for them. They spent just to elect Tom Wolf more than $7 million in this last election cycle. So they definitely have some sway. You just take, for example, the PSEA. They spent more than $3.5 million, I believe, on union dues for politics and lobbying just last year. So there's definitely they definitely have some money to throw around, and they're a political force in the Commonwealth.
So what's it going to take to get the change? I mean, do you have any hope for the future here? Are there people out there who are spearheading this? Do you see the Republicans taking this on? Because for a lot of people, I got to be honest with you, that I talk to say, well, I don't really care about this that much. Okay, yeah, it's a wrong. It shouldn't be done. The unions get a little extra. The public unions get a little extra help here. But, with property tax and pensions and everything else out there, this really kind of pales in comparison. So what do you say to those people who kind of take that attitude?
Well, I would try to make the moral case to them that there should be no one be forced to subsidize political beliefs that they disagree with. It's just morally wrong. It's unfair, and it needs to end. And I would say property taxes are extremely important, education funding, all those things. And the unions, because of their political privilege, have the ability to stop property tax reform, have the ability to lobby for more money for education, even though we know that spending more money doesn't necessarily mean better results.
Right.
So because of this political privilege that they're afforded, they have an advantage in terms of stopping reform, perpetuating the status quo. And so paycheck protection would go a long way to getting some of the things done that we want to see, because if you have the government unions with this political privilege and they can use it against taxpayers, that's not good for taxpayers.
I was reading a little bit out of the Public Employee Labor Relations Act, and it states this, quote, no employee organization shall make any contribution out of the funds of the employee organization, either directly or indirectly, to any political party or organization or in support of any political candidate for public office, unquote. I read the quote in the beginning. It said about, let me go back to this very quickly, and it talked about the idea of you should vote for Tom Wolf and not vote for Governor Corbett. Well, that obviously is taken aside. So how do they get away with this if that, in fact, is part of the Public Employee Relations Act, Labor Relations Act?
Well, it's funny because they actually, as you mentioned, they responded right before Christmas. And in their response, they cited Citizens United. And if your listeners aren't familiar with that, it was the Supreme Court's decision that allowed not just corporations but unions to give money to independent entities in order so that they can spend on political elections. And that's actually what they cite in their response to this charge filed by the Fairness Center. And it's funny because they've mentioned before about how awful Citizens United is, but here they are citing it. And so there's a bit of hypocrisy there. I
saw where the PSEA spokesman said that the statute, this is David Broderick again, said the statute relates to dues dollars that will go directly toward a candidate's campaign or to promote somebody's candidacy to the general public. That's different from the rules that govern our member-to-member communications, Broderick said, calling it an important distinction. I'm looking at that, and it seems to me that someone there, it's like when you get something advertised in the mail that says it's free and it turns out it's not free at all. You kind of have the same distinction being made here a little bit, don't you? I mean, the idea that, well, it's free, but no, not really. This is like Clintonese a bit.
Well, for from my perspective, this isn't, there's no difference between subsidizing or having using union dues to communicate with members, which is what they say they're doing, and also spending this on the NEA Advocacy Fund, which then the NEA Advocacy Fund spends money for other entities that are not communicating with their members. So on the one hand, they're saying, yes, we just use this to communicate with our members, but on the other hand, they're spending money and sending money to these organizations that are not just specifically talking to their members. So
they're talking to their members, husbands and wives and spouses
right.
in general. Yeah. It was interesting. Let's come back to Mary Trometter here at the end. She says she said, I would say that over the last several years, I feel the PSEA's mission has changed. It's not the same union that I joined 20 years ago. I would probably say that, too, looking back at it now than when I actually was in teaching. And I look at it now, and it seems far more political than it has ever been. And I didn't sense that they were as political then. I went to a lot of PSEA conventions and those kinds of things, and content and teaching and so forth was a lot more what we talked about at that particular time. Has it changed a lot in the last 20 or so years, Bob?
I'm not really sure I can speak to that. I haven't followed the PSEA's political spending for the last 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
But I could just say that the PSEA is supposed to represent its members. But with this letter that they sent to Mary's husband, they misrepresented Mary. They misled her husband. And they did so to advance their political agenda. So she's right that she's not getting her money's worth in union dues as well as teachers across the state. And that's the issue right now. That's the problem right now. And that's the reason why we need Mary's Law. Very
quickly, what would Mary's Law have in it?
It would prohibit the automatic collection of union dues, the political portion of union dues, as well as PAC contributions. So unions would have to collect their own political money. It would still keep in place fair share fees, which is the money that's used for representing members and collective bargaining agreements and things like that. So it would just stop the collection of political money, and it would require government unions to do what every other organization has to do, and that is collect their own political money and lobbying money.
Do we see a time when any decision will come down on this in the near future?
I can't say for sure whether there's going to be a certain time frame or a certain point when this would pass, but as I said, we're going to continue to push for this issue because it's important.
Bob, we appreciate you taking the time to be with us this morning. Thank you so much.
Gary, thanks very much.
Take care, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Bob Dick, who is a policy analyst with the Commonwealth Foundation, talking about Mary Trometter's experience. If you want to check her out, just Google Mary Trometter. You'll find it. And the idea of taking away the automatic collection of money, which is being spent like 100% of the members are all Democrats or on the left, when that's not true. And in Mary Trometter's case, it was especially not true. And should they be taking money out, having the employer take money out that they can then spend without asking the person first whether they want that money spent on their behalf, on those candidates? All one-sided, by the way.